It happened on an ordinary afternoon when the sun was pouring gold over the apartment courtyard, but for Armin Qureshi, nothing about that moment would ever feel ordinary again. He was standing near his window, pretending to adjust the curtain that didn't really need adjusting, pretending even more desperately that he wasn't watching the moving truck across the narrow lane. That was when it happened, the moment that made his heart drop into his stomach. The new neighbor had stepped out of the car, and for a brief second, her eyes lifted and locked directly onto his. Not in confusion. Not in surprise. But in awareness. It was the kind of look that didn't just notice you'd understood you. And in that single moment, Armin felt completely exposed, as if every silent habit, every lonely afternoon of watching life from behind glass, had been seen all at once. If this story touches your heart, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Echo Tellys for more emotional stories about kindness, healing, and second chances. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Armin had been living in that small apartment for almost 3 years, yet it still felt temporary, like a waiting room he never quite left. He worked remotely in a job that drained him of conversation but filled his bank account just enough to survive. His days were predictable: wake up, coffee, work, silence, and the occasional glance out the window that reminded him the world was still moving without him. He told himself he was fine with it. That solitude was peace. But deep down, it was something else entirely. It was avoidance. After a past he rarely allowed himself to revisit, Armin had built walls so carefully that even loneliness couldn't break through them anymore. Then she arrived. Her name, he would later learn, was Lena Hartwell. She moved into the apartment directly across from his, the one with the small balcony filled with half-dead plants and sunlight that always seemed softer than anywhere else in the building. From the first day, she felt different in a way Armin couldn't immediately explain. She didn't rush inside like most new tenants. She paused. She observed. She looked at the building not as a place to live, but as a place to understand. And somehow, that made Armin uneasy. Over the next few days, he noticed things he didn't intend to notice. The way she watered her plants with patience, as if each leaf mattered. The way she sat on her balcony in the afternoons, reading books that looked old and well-loved. The way she smiled at strangers passing below without expecting anything in return. It wasn't that she was loud or attention-seeking. It was the opposite. She was calm in a way that made silence feel alive again. And Armin, without meaning to, found himself watching her more often than he should have. At first, it was harmless. A glance here, a moment there. But soon it became a habit he couldn't justify. He would pretend to be working while actually waiting for her to appear on her balcony. He would pause his coffee breaks when he heard her door open. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. Yet there was something dangerous about how naturally she filled the emptiness of his viewpoint. One afternoon, everything shifted. The sun was high, the air warm, and Armin was once again standing near his window, pretending to focus on a file on his laptop. Lena had just stepped onto her balcony, her hair loosely tied, her presence calm as always. But this time, something was different. She didn't immediately look away like before. Instead, she turned slightly and looked directly at him again, holding the gaze longer than comfort allowed. Armin froze. There was nowhere to hide, no curtain to pull fast enough, no excuse strong enough to undo what had just been revealed, and then she smiled, not mockingly. Not accusingly. But gently. As if she understood something about him he hadn't yet admitted to himself. That smile carried no judgment, only recognition. It unsettled him more than anything else ever had. After that day, Armin avoided the window. He told himself it was better this way. That he had crossed a line he shouldn't have. But avoidance has a strange way of making things louder. He began hearing her presence even when he couldn't see her, the soft closing of her door, the rustle of her plants, the distant sound of her music in the evenings. It was as if she had become part of the building's rhythm, and by extension, part of his silence. Days passed like this until one late morning when Armin finally stepped outside to get groceries. The weather was bright, the kind of daylight that made everything feel more honest than usual. And there she was, standing near the entrance, struggling slightly with a heavy box of books. For a moment, Armin considered walking past, pretending not to notice. That was what he always did. That was what felt safe. But something about the way she paused, as if waiting not for help but for acknowledgement, made him stop. He helped her without speaking much. She accepted without hesitation. There was no awkwardness, no forced politeness. Just two strangers sharing a moment that felt strangely familiar. When their hands briefly touched while adjusting the box, Armin felt something he hadn't felt in years. Presence. Real, grounded presence. From that day, small interactions began to form like cracks in a long frozen wall. Not conversations in the traditional sense, but shared moments. Passing each other in hallways. Brief nods. Silent acknowledgements that grew heavier with meaning over time. Lena never rushed him. She never invaded his space. But she never pretended not to notice him either. And that balance unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Armin began to realize something uncomfortable about himself. He wasn't just lonely. He was disconnected. From people. From emotion. From himself. And Lena, with her quiet existence, seemed to reflect that truth back at him without ever saying a word. One afternoon, rain began falling unexpectedly. Armin stood by his window watching the streets blur into silver reflections. Lena was on her balcony again, standing in the rain without shelter, as if she welcomed it. Armin felt an impulse he didn't understand: concern, curiosity, something warmer than either. For the first time, instead of watching from a distance, he stepped outside onto his own balcony. The air between them felt charged, not with tension, but with recognition. Lena turned slightly, noticing him there. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not a question. Not an answer. Just understanding. In the days that followed, Armin found himself slowly changing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, almost invisible ways. He began stepping outside more often. He began noticing colors again: the green of the courtyard trees, the warmth of sunlight on concrete, the sound of life moving beyond screens and walls. He even started taking longer routes when returning home, as if learning how to exist in the world again instead of merely passing through it. Lena remained a quiet constant in all of it. She never forced anything. She never asked him to explain himself. Yet somehow, her presence alone felt like permission to breathe, to exist, to be seen without fear. But healing is never a straight path. One evening, Armin noticed something unusual. A man had arrived at Lena's apartment. They spoke briefly, their interaction tense. The man's posture was rigid, his presence heavy with unspoken history. Lena's calm demeanor faltered slightly, just enough for Armin to notice. And for the first time, curiosity turned into concern. That night, Armin couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her silence, about the weight behind it that he had never questioned before. He realized he knew almost nothing about her past, yet she had slowly become the center of his emotional world. That realization frightened him. Because attachment, for someone like him, always felt like a prelude to loss. The next morning, he saw her sitting alone on her balcony, unusually still. Something inside him pushed him forward. He stepped outside, not to watch, but to be present. For the first time, he didn't feel like an observer. He felt like a participant in his own life. What followed was not a dramatic confession, nor a sudden revelation. It was something quieter. Something more human. Two people standing on separate balconies, sharing a silence that no longer felt empty. In that silence, Armin understood something profound. Lena wasn't just a neighbor who caught him staring. She was someone who had noticed his loneliness and chose not to shame him for it. Instead, she allowed him to grow into something better than it. Over time, pieces of their stories unfolded slowly, not through dramatic declarations but through trust built in fragments. Armin learned that Lena had also carried her own form of quiet struggle, a past marked by emotional distance and the challenge of rebuilding trust in the world. And Lena, in turn, learned that Armin's silence was never emptiness, it was protection. Their connection didn't bloom loudly. It grew gently, like light spreading across a room at dawn. One afternoon, months later, Armin stood at his window again. But this time, he wasn't hiding. He wasn't watching in secret. He was simply present. Lena noticed him and smiled, the same calm smile that had once unsettled him but now felt like home. And for the first time, Armin smiled back without hesitation. Before this story ends, take a moment to comment just below your thoughts, your emotions, or even a simple word. Your voice matters more than you know, and if this story touched something inside you, don't forget to like, share, and engage with this video. It truly helps spread stories of healing, kindness, and second chances to others who might need them. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in warm shades of gold and quiet hope, Armin realized something he had never believed before. Sometimes, the people we think we are watching from a distance are the ones quietly watching over us too. And sometimes, all it takes to begin again is someone brave enough to say nothing at all, yet still make you feel seen. The story of Armin and Lena didn't end in that soft sunset moment. In fact, what came next was the part that neither of them were truly prepared for, the part where silence stops being safe and starts demanding answers. It began with distance. Lena didn't appear on her balcony the next morning. At first, Armin told himself it meant nothing. People had routines, lives, distractions. But by the second day, the absence started to feel heavier than her presence ever had. The courtyard looked unchanged, the sunlight still fell in the same patterns, yet something in Armin's world had quietly shifted out of place. He found himself standing by the window more often than usual again, but this time not out of curiosity. Out of concern he didn't fully understand how to name. The strange thing about connection is that it changes the shape of loneliness, it doesn't remove it, it sharpens it. On the third day, he finally saw her. Lena stepped onto the balcony slowly, unlike her usual calm rhythm. There was something restrained in her movements, like she was carrying more than just her usual thoughts. She didn't look toward his window immediately. That alone was enough to make Armin uneasy. When their eyes finally met, it wasn't the same quiet comfort anymore. There was something guarded in her gaze, something that felt like distance had been rebuilt overnight. Armin felt it instantly, that invisible shift people rarely speak about but always recognize. The moment when someone becomes emotionally harder to reach, even while standing right in front of you. He wanted to go outside, to ask if everything was alright, but something stopped him. The same instinct that had once kept him behind glass now whispered again, stay safe, stay quiet, don't disturb what you don't understand. And for the first time in weeks, he listened to that voice, but peace did not come with that decision. Only regret did. The following evening, he noticed the man again, the same one from before. This time, the interaction was sharper, more intense. Lena stood between him and the door, her posture firm but her expression controlled, as if she had practiced calmness in situations that never deserved calmness. The man left after a few minutes, but not before saying something that made her shoulders tighten slightly. Even from a distance, Armin could feel the weight of it. And when the door finally closed, Lena remained still for a long time, as if collecting pieces of herself that had scattered without permission. That night, Armin couldn't sit still. He kept replaying every small moment he had noticed but never questioned. The way she sometimes looked too thoughtful for simple evenings. The way her smiles occasionally carried effort instead of ease. The way her silence sometimes felt less like peace and more like survival. He realized something uncomfortable, that he didn't know her life. He only knew the version of her that existed on balconies and in brief shared glances, and yet, somehow, she had begun to matter to him in a way that felt dangerously real. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Armin found a small envelope slipped under his door. There was no name on it, just a single folded note inside. His hands hesitated before opening it, as if the paper itself carried weight beyond ink. When he finally read it, his breath slowed, not because it was long, but because it was simple. It said she was leaving for a while. That she needed space. That nothing he had done was wrong, but what made his chest tighten wasn't what was written. It was what wasn't. No explanation. No reassurance beyond formality. No trace of the warmth that had slowly been building between them, just absence, neatly folded into paper. For the first time in years, Armin felt something he had worked hard to avoid feeling again: loss, before anything had even fully begun. The days that followed felt hollow. He went through routines without awareness. Coffee tasted like nothing. Work blurred into background noise. Even the window, once a silent companion, became something he avoided altogether, because looking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling. Yet, despite everything, he found himself doing it anyway, every evening, same time, same place. As if expecting something impossible, until one evening, something changed, not dramatically, not loudly, just a light in her apartment. A faint glow behind the curtains. It wasn't her silhouette, not clearly, but it was enough to break something open inside him. Hope, carefully buried, resurfaced without permission. The next morning, he saw her again. Lena was back on the balcony, but she wasn't the same, not broken, not distant either, just quieter in a different way, like someone who had been somewhere far away emotionally and returned carrying parts of it with them. This time, Armin didn't wait. He stepped outside immediately. The air between them felt heavier than before, not with tension, but with everything unspoken that had accumulated during her absence. Lena noticed him, and for a moment, neither of them moved. It was Armin who finally broke the silence, not with words, but with presence. He didn't rush closer. He didn't demand explanation. He simply stayed where he was, visible, steady, real, and that mattered more than anything he could have said. Lena's expression softened slightly, like she had been expecting distance and found something else instead. For a long moment, neither spoke, because some conversations don't begin with sentences, they begin with surviving each other's absence. And then slowly, carefully, the truth started to unfold, not all at once, but in pieces that didn't try to overwhelm the moment. Lena had been dealing with something she hadn't yet found the strength to fully share. A chapter of her life that didn't belong to the past because it still reached into her present. The man wasn't just a visitor. He was a reminder. A pressure she was still learning how to stand against without collapsing into old versions of herself. And Armin, listening without interruption, realized something he had never truly understood before. Strength wasn't loud, healing wasn't instant, and trust wasn't something people owed each other just because they cared. It was something earned slowly, especially after silence had been used as protection for so long. Days turned into a new rhythm after that, not perfect, not healed, but honest. Armin stopped watching from windows and started living outside them more often. Lena stopped disappearing into silence when things became difficult. Instead, she began speaking in fragments, in pauses, in moments that didn't demand perfection, and Armin learned to listen not just with curiosity, but with patience. One evening, as the sky turned soft and orange again, Lena stood beside him on the same ground instead of across the distance of balconies. It was a small shift in space, but a massive shift in meaning. She didn't say anything dramatic, neither did he, but something between them finally settled, not as an ending, but as the beginning of something no longer built on distance. Before this story ends, take a moment to comment just below your thoughts, your feelings, or even a single word. It matters more than you think, and if this story touched your heart even slightly, don't forget to like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps bring more emotional stories like this to people who might need them the most, because sometimes, the most powerful connections are not the ones that arrive loudly but the ones that quietly stay after everything else has fallen apart.